Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope you've had a great day. Today, it's Poseidon's turn. Poseidon was a blue-haired, muscular god, a brother of Hades, Zeus, Hera, Demeter, and the goddess of the hearth. Fairly prominent figure in Greek mythology, and also he's the last brother out of the trio being Hades, Zeus, Poseidon that we're actually covering. He has a great deal of control over the ocean's waters. He can control whether they're calm or whether they're quite fierce, based somewhat around his emotions. So if he's pretty upset, you can expect a good deal of storms and furious waves and just generally the type of weather that might cause you to crash if you were sailing in a ship. He also has status among the beings of the ocean and the ocean deities, and typically they'll either follow his command or sort of work with him. Now Poseidon's trident also allows him to manipulate the earth, spawning earthquakes, tremors, things of that nature. So he's also a fairly scary deity to consider on the earth, and that's probably also why his tier 1 is called what it's called. After Zeus deals with his father and frees his brothers and sisters, he equally divides the lands which were then placed into his control. He took the sky, Poseidon the seas, and Hades the underworld, the realm of the dead. But he did this mostly to establish order. Cronus sought to rule everything as the supreme ruler, and Zeus, by splitting up these new areas equally amongst his brothers, sought to break up the tyranny that was spawned from Cronus having everything. He even drew lots to make things as fair as possible, and as chance have it, he got the sky, which he probably kind of sort of wanted anyways. I mention this purely just because it shows a side to Zeus that's fair, just, and logical. He has this deal of honor about him, and he does uphold this sort of sense of justice among other people. This is just one instance of him doing that very thing. So in one of these myths, Poseidon ends up meeting his wife Amphitrite. The myth begins by saying that Poseidon was very angry for some reason. That specific reason being that he was lonely and wanted a companion. He was so angry that the seas and the heavens themselves were sort of uniting, and this pleased Zeus none. Eventually though, Poseidon stumbled across Amphitrite, and immediately fell in love with her because she was the most beautiful being that he had just ever seen. She had golden hair, blue eyes, and a perfect figure that just attracted Poseidon. She was the granddaughter of Oceanus, the primordial sea god, and daughter of Nereus, another god of the sea that was losing his sort of prominence, or was not quite as prominent as Poseidon. Either way, Amphitrite and Poseidon meet. Whilst Amphitrite isn't completely disinterested in Poseidon necessarily, she does ultimately flee to the Atlas Mountains. And this is because Poseidon's so angry and so fearsome when he's raging that Amphitrite just isn't attracted to that and decides that she just has to go. Not wanting to scare Amphitrite away for a second time, Poseidon commands Delphinus, a sort of sea king, to go ahead and ask for Amphitrite's return. Now Delphinus is a very loyal king and does this at Poseidon's request. He struggles to convince Amphitrite at first, but eventually, after making the promise that once Amphitrite marries Poseidon, Poseidon's rages would calm down and the seas would tranquil once more, she then returns to Poseidon and they get married and have children. Now they have 3 children. One of them, I'm not sure whether they're male or female or what the deal is with that. There's definitely a daughter with a fairly funny to pronounce name that I'm not going to attempt, and then Triton. Personally, I think Triton's the coolest sounding name out of the bunch, but he also has defined responsibilities as the messenger of Poseidon. In some myths, he goes off to have his own children. Not only is he the messenger of Poseidon, but he's also a fairly powerful deity in his own right. He had either a trident or a horn or shell that he could blow into to either calm the ocean's waves or just to amp them up a bit and make them violent and horrible to try and travel across. He was also either a fairly young deity or an older man as far as his appearance was concerned. But that's enough on Triton. Even though at first Poseidon's rages were calmed, eventually Amphitrite's best efforts just weren't enough, and he eventually did become quite angry. Also, Aphrodite suffered from what Hera had to deal with Zeus, in that Poseidon wasn't exactly the most faithful deity in the world. Not only was there the tragedy with Medusa, being that thanks to Poseidon and Medusa, shall we say, hooking up, Medusa loses all of her good looks and has to live a solitary life, only to be slain by a hero, and Poseidon does not get punished for this. Poseidon also fathered a number of different children. Some places have told me that the number is around 50, but I'm not 100% sure how many children he actually fathered. But unlike Zeus, where there were certain children such as Ares that Zeus either neglected or didn't like as much, just outright made sure that they knew they weren't his favorite, Poseidon, from what I've been able to find, loved all of his children, and seemed to have been a fairly good father in that sense. But also Poseidon seems to have been punished for his devious nature, sexually devious nature at least. See, in this one story, he falls in love with this person, and they create a son together called Aegeus. Now, this chap is very successful at creating wine, and growing the plants that are used for wine, rather. But he treats his workers horribly, and eventually one of them curse him, saying, "Never should you drink wine from your vineyard." And being the son of a sea god, Aegeus just laughs this off and thinks pointless, silly fret. And he's about to taste some wine that was just created for him, and he's called away on some business and is slain. So the prophecy actually came true. He was cursed not to drink wine and he didn't. So in this way, Poseidon actually does get punished a lot more than Zeus does for his breaking of that sort of honor, that tradition. You know, marriage is supposed to be between two people and you're supposed to only see each other, not other people. But Poseidon sort of broke that. Apparently, Poseidon also got a divorce from Aphrodite, though again, I'm not 100% sure about that. But the question I'm posing in this video is, who was worse, Poseidon or Zeus? Both had temper anger management issues, though Zeus's anger management issues, from what I've been able to find, typically were taken out on individuals that angered him. He wasn't just necessarily angry and took out his anger on literally every living being in the ocean, or spawned random earthquakes on the earth like Poseidon might have. Okay, I should prefix that by saying that there were a number of different beings within the ocean who had the power to calm down its waves. So when I say every single being in the ocean, that is a bit of hyperbole, but you get the point. Which it would suck to be a sailor, a Greek sailor, just Poseidon being randomly angry and capsizing your boat. Ever seen the Titanic? Yeah, that seems like some traumatic stuff. So yes. But then on the flip side, Zeus had a tendency to only like the sons and daughters that fit like his perfect image of what a Greek person, should look like, or a Greek god should necessarily be. Ares, and technically even though Vulcan wasn't necessarily his son, or rather Hephaestus wasn't his son, he still didn't treat them very nice. Athena, of course, was his favorite child, and that alone, in parenting you're probably not supposed to outright say that you have a favorite. He made it very clear that Athena, or it was made very clear that Athena was his favorite. So there's that half, that negative to Zeus. There's also another sort of shining point for Zeus. See, Zeus, even though he didn't necessarily live by the rules that he upheld, as I sort of pointed out before with the whole him trying to fairly divide the different realms equally amongst his brothers, Zeus had a whole thing of order and sort of justice about him. He even, in one myth that I'll talk about in Zeus's lore video if I actually get around to making it, he turns a king into a werewolf after that very king starts making sacrifices to the gods themselves. The Greek gods didn't exactly like sacrifices, and they definitely didn't like human sacrifices. So Zeus goes undercover into this king's city, witnesses firsthand that the king tried to serve him human, and then Zeus turns him into a werewolf. Although Zeus does directly punish the king, he also indirectly punishes the king's people as well, because the king does turn into a werewolf, or a werewolf-like creature, shall we say. That wolf thing starts to not only just leave the city, but also claims a new territory for itself, and then starts to hunt and feast on people. So, yes, justice was sort of done, and then a negativity was put into the world. But the point is, he upheld his own sense of justice. Also, when Typhonus invaded Olympus, Zeus was the only god, bar maybe one or two goddesses that might have stuck around. Zeus was the only god that fought off Typhonus. He had his tendons extracted, and that was pretty painful, and he does come back and defeat Typhonus eventually, but the point is, he had the bravery to face this beast where even Poseidon himself ran. As for the question of who was the worst sort of god, or if you wanted to see them as actual real-life people, who would be seen as the worst person, I suppose it just comes down to what you value more, because they weren't exactly, if we're considering them to be people, good people. But at the very same time, they had good qualities. Both of them had the respect of those that they sort of ruled under, and they both had sort of a mutual respect or understanding of each other's power. Hence why Zeus didn't just outright slap Poseidon in the face and tell him to knock off his rage and mess up the sea during the story in which he meets Aphrodite. And also, just as a side note, quite a few places also mention Poseidon's rage quite a bit, so yeah, living under Poseidon probably wasn't necessarily the nicest thing in the world. Though, then again, there are a few deities, such as Triton, for instance, that I already mentioned, who had the ability to calm the seas. So I'm sure that it was a bit of a balancing act. Either way, tell me what you think in the comment section below. Who do you think was the worst? Just in terms of just how they would have been as, let's say, just people. These are, of course, gods. Can't really take that from them. But assuming that you could compare them to human beings on that level, you felt comfortable doing that, who would be just the worst person if you could only condemn one to absolute punishments, tortures, and just facing punishments for their crimes, or misdoings, wrongdoings, if you will? Who would you do that to? Poseidon or Zeus? Let me know in the comment section below, but you've reached the end of the video, and thank you very, very much for watching. If you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, and of course subscribe to the channel for more content like this, but until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.